and welcome. I'm Melinda Kimami. Tonight, President Muhammadu Buhari tells African leaders to put up a common position in the fight against corruption as Rwanda's President Paul Kagame takes over the leadership of the African Union. President Buhari and the former President Olusegun Obasanjo exchanged pleasantries in Addis Ababa in spite of the recent letter from Chief Obasanjo advising the president not to seek a second term in office. Security operatives killed the younger brother of suspected cultist Don Wani 2 weeks after his brother was also gunned down. And U.S. President Donald Trump reiterates his respect for the people of Africa a few weeks after allegedly using foul language against the continent. We begin tonight from the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa, where President Muhammadu Buhari is calling on his colleagues within the continent to adopt a common position and push for a change of mindset if the war against corruption is to become a reality. The president unveiled his plans when he formally launched the theme of the AU Anti-Corruption Crusade. The event is one of the highlights of the summit, which saw the emergence of the Rwandan President Paul Kagame as the chairperson of the African Union. Our correspondent, Ibrahim Adra, tells us more.
It's the 30th edition of the meeting, an ordinary session, and African leaders and decision-makers occupy every available space. There is a lot to talk about, but a few issues stand out. Leaders on the continent are seeking ways to reform the AU, their countries, fight terrorism and corruption. President Muhammadu Buhari is designated by his colleagues to spearhead the continental move against corruption. He accepts the challenge and started by pointing out the impact of the phenomenon on the continent's development.
Corruption is indeed one of the greatest evils of our time. Corruption rewards those who do not play by the rules and also creates a system of distortion and diversion, thereby destroying all efforts of constructive, just, and fair governance.
2018 provides for President Buhari and the AU a period to assess and rethink strategies of curbing the menace. As he settles to the task, he's already started at home. The president sees these as priorities in winning the war.
I cannot overemphasize the value of strong institutions. A judiciary which stands firm against arbitrariness and injustice by the executive is a vital pillar in the anti-corruption fight.
The new chairperson of AU, Paul Kagame of Rwanda, promises to mobilize support for President Buhari. In his speech, he unfolds his plans, which include paying attention to African youth and giving women their rights.
Freedom of movement of people in Africa is equally important, and it is achievable in 2018. A single continental market, integrate our infrastructure, and infuse our economies with technology.
Representatives of global and regional blocs gave assurances of continued support to AU as it strives to transform. It's the first time in all of its 54 years that the AU is making anti-corruption the theme of its summit. Now, President Muhammadu Buhari is reputed to abhor corruption, a reputation that looms large. However, ridding Africa of the menace of corruption depends on the support he gets, as well as the level of cooperation amongst member states of the AU. In Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, Ibrahim Adra, Channels Television News.
Earlier in the day, President Muhammadu Buhari and former President Olusegun Obasanjo were the center of all eyes when the two met face-to-face at that summit. It's the first time both men are meeting since the controversial statement released by the former president criticizing Buhari's administration and advising him not to seek a second term in office. The two leaders, who were joined by former military leader Abdul Salami Abubakar, exchanged pleasantries and even posed for a picture to the admiration of all present. Now, joining us to discuss the 30th Summit of the African Union is Dr. Dapo Thomas, a lecturer at the University at the Lagos State University. He's from the Department of History and International Studies. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, this is the first time the African Union is having as its theme corruption. What do you say about that?
Well, I think it's getting, they have noticed that it has gotten to an embarrassing level where they have to come up with some instruments to really address frontally the issue of corruption in Africa, taking into cognizance the level of development and the kinds of embarrassment which the international community, the kind of abhorrence and the kind of stigmatization which corruption actually attracts for most African leaders, even when they are not guilty. Yes, they have some instruments like the convention preventing, the African Union Convention preventing and combating corruption, which was signed by 38 countries in 2006. Unfortunately, lack of political will on the part of the leadership has frustrated any kinds of measure to address corruption. But I think because of his own moral constitution, his own moral authority, as somebody who can speak against corruption, President Buhari now came out, to say, okay, I want to deliver a paper, I want to address this thing. And that's based on the leverage, that's based on his own credibility as somebody who is fighting corruption.
And that brings me to my next question, Dr. Thomas. How significant is it that President Muhammadu Buhari is the one leading the pack?
Yes, like I said, he has the moral authority because there is evidence. It may not be satisfactory to a section of the people, but I want to believe that on the two occasions that Nigeria had serious and comprehensive war against corruption, it had been this particular person. In 1984, we all saw what he did against corrupt politicians. Well, to some extent, some people still believe that he didn't handle the situation properly. Why? Because of the way he dealt with some elders in the Southwest, whom was seen as not being corrupt. But, he treated them the same. He treated them in a shabby way. Now, again, we have seen him, his return as a democratic leader. We have seen what EFCC is doing. And I want to believe objectively that EFCC has tried. And that's why he, based on that, can now transform, his own moral constitution, his own moral position to the international level, particularly at the African Union level, so as to engage, as to ask his compatriots to start thinking of setting up institutional mechanisms to address corruption frontally and conscientiously. I think he's looking at the fact that the person who is coming to become the chairman now, Paul Kagame, is also somebody like him. We can see what he's doing in Rwanda. And with like minds like that, I think he wants to, he's coming up with this idea now, and then he's at liberty, and he has the moral authority to lead the war against corruption and to also expatiate, to also espouse the ideals of a non-corrupt society or continent.
Now, one of the things the president mentioned in his speech was the fact that African leaders should have a common position. How practical and realistic is this, considering the different people with alleged corruption cases who have survived, like the South African president, Jacob Zuma, who has survived several corruption cases which were hanging over his head, and the different policies in different countries? Can we have a common position as a continent?
Well, he's talking of a common position at the level of the AU, at the level of that organization. It will be very difficult to have a kind of common front based on the fact that most African leaders are not actually ready to stem corruption or to reduce or combat corruption. And it's unfortunate that those who are involved at the helm of affairs in Africa now are people who are 70 and above. And to now conceptualize the fact that these are the same people that are engaging in corrupt practices is very, is very baffling and troubling. But for states to now engage, or for states to come together for a kind of cohesion, which is advocating, it may be very difficult to achieve this, because if there is no political will on the part of the leaders of other countries, it will be very difficult to achieve a kind of frontal instrument which he is talking about.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Dapo Thomas. Is a lecturer, Department of History and International Studies, Lagos State University. To other stories now. 2 weeks after the death of suspected cultist and kidnapper Don Wani, security operatives has also killed his brother and ally. Sources at the Department of State's Security Services told Channel Television that Oluchi Igwedibia, popularly known as Obatosu, was regarded as even more vicious than his dead brother. He's one of the 32 persons declared wanted by the Rivers State government and has also been allegedly linked to mass killings and other criminal activities in Umuku. The Commissioner of Police in Rivers State, Zaki Ahmed, says security operatives were able to track him down via intelligence gathering.
It's a collective responsibility. We have been getting information from members of the public. We want them to sustain this tempo, to always give security agencies good information, actionable information that will lead to the arrest of criminals. Every evil era has an expiration date. You can now see the era of Don Wani and his gang is all over. So the youth should take a cue from what happened in the previous week to know that, you cannot escape the long arms of the law.
Now, for over 8 years, the name Don Wani sent shivers down the spines of residents in Rivers State. Will all that change after security operatives announced his death during a shootout 2 weeks ago? In this next report, our correspondent, Emmanuel Ire, examines the reign of terror associated with that late kidnapper and the process that produces his likes in the Niger Delta region.
In this amateur video, suspected mass murderer and cultist Don Wani is seen wearing a jersey number 99, surrounded by an army of dreadful-looking armed thugs in an unknown location chanting his praises. He apparently wielded so much power and allegedly unleashed terror on the communities, leaving trails of blood, sorrow and tears among the people. Many times, his victims were killed in the most gruesome manner, with their heads severed. Monday, 20th of November 2017, troops of 6th Division invaded the multi-million naira home and shrine of the notorious ex-militant. Human skulls and bones are unearthed. His personal uniforms and other items are also paraded. It appears the ex-militant had built a dreaded and fearful reputation for himself, for which the community honored him.
If you know the half of the boy wanted to and plotted to do after the 1st of January, by now, they are going to eliminate 200 people in Omoko.
Some say the New Year's Day attack in Omoko, allegedly led by Don Wani, leaving 21 persons dead as at the last count, was the beginning of the end for his dreaded gang. The Department of State Services Rivers State Command, through his geolocation device, narrowed down his manhunt to a Demnike community in Enugu East local government area, in a residential area where Don Wani was caught and shot while trying to escape. His father tells Channel Television on the phone that he regrets the actions of his son.
This thing that my son did is very bad. It's very bad in the sight of God and in the sight of man. I am not happy. I am not happy when I heard that story. I lamented. I cried. How come? This is not people that you see. Is it animals or human beings? This is like God. So I'm not happy.
Some, however, believe there is still danger lurking in the dark.
Though Don killed, but there are so many other Don around.
The caretaker committee chairman of a local government area makes it clear that the killing of the suspected killer and cultist has no political undertone. Our investigations shown here reveal the cycle of production of the likes of Don Wani and other deadly criminals. Oil companies who allegedly use them to protect their installations in the creeks. Politicians and moneybags who use them for election purposes. The palatial home of the late Don Wani was allegedly built for him by an oil giant in Port Harcourt. Sources from the DSS confirms exclusively to Channels Television that so far 2 bank accounts running into billions of naira have been linked to him and will be made public soon, and oil companies also linked to his operations named. Although the state government has declared more than 30 other suspected dangerous persons wanted with a vow to nail them, some hold the view that breaking the backs of men of the underworld requires a will of steel and genuine collaboration of the security agencies. Emmanuel Irei, Channels Television News.